The story begins in Buffalo, New York. Dan was an exceptional car salesman, well known for his ability to understand and connect with customers. Thanks to his consistent performance, he was once again named Salesman of the Month. Just then, his energetic colleague Hal pulled into the dealership. Hal always joked that cars were like chicks. They want to go fast. That afternoon, Dan decided to take an early leave from work to celebrate his wedding anniversary with his family. He valued his family life deeply and enjoyed the warm, close-knit atmosphere of his neighborhood. His wife was thrilled that Dan had remembered their anniversary. The couple had 3 kids, Nina, Kyle, and Max. Nina wanted to change her college major from journalism to something else. However, her parents didn't support the idea. Kyle struggled to communicate with his father. Kyle planned to visit his friend Samir that evening. A heated argument broke out between Nina and Kyle over who would stay home to babysit Max during their parents' anniversary night out. Dan intervenes and assigned the babysitting duty to Nina, reasoning that it would be good for Kyle to spend some time outside the house. Nina agreed, but she was visibly frustrated. She knew Kyle's real reason for going to Samir's place. He rode to his friend's house. Kyle had secretly been paying Samir $200 to store his gaming setup in his garage. Unknown to his family, Kyle had become a popular streamer known as Killboy, famous for his unbeatable skills in a top-tier shooting game. Dan visits the carnival with his wife Jessica. While they're waiting in line for the roller coaster, a group ahead offers to let them go first. Dan, always appreciating simple moments like these, happily accepts. After the thrilling roller coaster ride, he turns to Jessica and promises, "Next year we'll go somewhere else even better." As they share a kiss, someone snaps a photo of them without permission. Dan confronts the guy and says, "Didn't you see we were sharing a private moment? Delete the photo." Instead of apologizing, the guy mocks Dan by uploads the photo online and calls him a loser. Jessica tries to calm Dan down, urging him to ignore it. But then the guy crosses the line. He spills his drink on Dan. Dan, struggling to control his anger, walks away despite the disrespect. On the way home, Jessica says, "You did the right thing. I don't want you getting into fights. And honestly, I don't care what they said." Dan comes home, still replaying the incident in his head. He gently changing Max's diaper. When he walks into the bedroom, he finds Jessica already asleep. She stirs as he slips into bed beside her. Dan mutters, "I should have kicked that guy. After what he said to you." Jessica laughs unexpectedly, which catches Dan off guard. Sensing his disappointment, she quickly apologizes. The next morning, Jessica heads to her kickboxing class. She strikes up a conversation with a woman named Gwen. While punching the heavy bag, she confides her troubles about their teenage daughter. Gwen reveals she is visiting Buffalo to see her ex-husband. Just then, an accidental punch from Jessica lands on Gwen's face, due to which a special bond was formed between the two of them. Jessica opens up with her and says that sometimes she feels like trapped, frustrated with Dan being content with their life. She expresses her desire to travel and see the world. Gwen, who reveals she's actually a travel agent. She hands Jessica her business card and says, "If you can convince your husband to travel, give me a call. I'm much better at my work than kickboxing." Dan is shopping with baby Max when he notices a strange man is keeping an eye on them. Moments later, the man suddenly lunges at him. Dan holds Max tight and says, "At least let me put the baby down." But the man ignores him and keeps swinging. Even with Max in his arms, Dan fights back. He blocks the punches and hits hard. After a few strong moves, Dan knocks the man to the ground. He grabs Max, races to the car, and speeds home. At home, Dan opens a hidden compartment in stairs and pulls out weapons, a stack of cash, and an expired passport. Realizing the danger is real, he makes an urgent call to a man named Augie. Dan says, "I need new passports for my entire family. We're in danger." He tells Augie that his old boss McCaffrey has found him. Dan offers him $500,000 for the fake IDs and tells him to meet in Las Vegas in 3 days. Augie questions, "Vegas? Why there?" "Because I haven't told my wife the truth yet, that I used to be an assassin before I married her." Augie urges him to tell the truth to his family, warning that escaping from McCaffrey will be nearly impossible with the family, who had no idea what was going on. Knowing time is running out, Dan quickly packs their belongings and rushes to pick up the kids from school. Dan walks into the classroom and asks, "Where's Nina?" A classmate informs him she quit journalism 3 months ago. Dan offers, "I'll give you $100 if you tell me where she is." The girl says, "Try under the bleachers." Dan heads straight there and finds Nina sitting under the bleachers. He's clearly frustrated. "You dropped journalism class 3 months ago?" Nina shrugs. "You don't even read my stuff." Dan doesn't have time for an argument. He asks, "Where's the chess club? We need to find your brother." Nina says he's not there. They drive to Samir's house. There, Dan discovers Kyle's been paying Samir to use his gaming setup in garage. Dan tells both of them, "Get in the car." He tells them, "We're going on a trip. We're picking up your mom." and you two better act excited about it. If you don't, I'll tell your mom everything. That both of you have been lying to us." Dan tries to convince Jessica to finally take the trip she's always dreamed of. He says the kids are also excited about trip. Nina and Kyle quickly nod and fake their excitement. Jessica, touched by the moment and impressed by Dan's effort, finally agrees. Just as Dan glances out the window, he sees a black car is parked across the road. He turns to Jessica and says, "We have to leave now." As they pull out of the parking lot, Dan notices McCaffrey's men waiting nearby. As the bus drives past, Dan cleverly slips through traffic and loses them without being noticed. The chase begins, but Dan expertly evades them, all while keeping his family unaware of the danger. He begins to suspect a tracker on the car. Dan heads straight to his workplace. Just before McCaffrey's men arrive, he closes the main gate behind them. He lifts the car with his family still inside. He says casually, "Just need to change the oil." He begins inspecting underneath, and soon he finds the tracker. As McCaffrey's men passing by, searching, Dan quietly hides. That's when he spots Hal, a coworker, about to test drive a new car. He discreetly attaches the tracker to the test car and casually tells Hal, "Push it hard." As Hal speeds off, the black car follows, tricked by the planted tracker. The family continues their trip. Jessica and the kids are eager to post online about the vacation, but Dan stops them. This is going to be a device-free trip. To avoid being tracked, Dan collects everyone's phones, and before they can protest, he throws them out of the car. "Wait, how are we supposed to know where we're going without phones?" They stop at a small travel agency. The clerk is surprised to learn they don't have phones. He pulls out a stack of dusty road maps. Dan tells him he needs help booking a room in Las Vegas and offers a stack of cash. For the first time during the trip, everyone is in the car, enjoying the music and sharing a memorable moment together. Meanwhile, McCaffrey personally shows up at Dan's house. His tech guy figures out that Kyle is a gamer and a pretty popular one. Back on the road, the family stops at a hotel called Burning River. Nina criticizes Kyle for spending so much time in gaming. Kyle fires back, "Do you even know your own personality? You used to be cool." Just then, a fan recognizes Kyle and asks for a selfie. Meanwhile, Dan is nervously practicing how to tell Jessica that he used to be an assassin. Afterward, he heads to the front desk to pay for their room. Dan steps out of the hotel and notices the girl snapping a photo with Kyle. Confused, he asks Nina, why is she calling him Kyle Boy? And why is she taking photos with him? Nina explains that Kyle Boy is his gamer tag and he's a famous streamer. Dan asks him, will she post those photos online? Kyle says, probably, yeah. Dan immediately changes plans. Bad news, everyone, the rooms are full. We gotta keep moving. McCaffrey hires a local gang to track Dan down. As Dan drives across a bridge, he spots 3 bikers. His family is fast asleep. Dan plays calming music through their headphones to keep them relaxed, then quietly prepares his silenced gun. One of the bikers shoots Dan's side mirror. Dan swerves and knocks the first biker off the road, barely avoiding a crash. Only Max is awake and he's actually enjoying the action. Dan crashes into the biker, escapes them, and drives away safely. After driving the whole night, Dan is about to take a nap, but his family wakes up. Nina says they're just half a mile from the university and suggests visiting the campus. Eventually, they agree and visit the campus. The university is vibrant. Students are busy with different activities. A guy offers Jessica to teach her how to do a handstand. As Jessica turns around and sees a baby in her hands, the guy quickly apologizes. But then she puts the baby aside, does a perfect handstand, and the whole campus cheers for her. Jessica turns to Nina and says, don't even think about trying something like that. Nina asks Kyle why they don't like Trevor. Kyle explains, we don't like Trevor because ever since you started dating him, you've changed. Meanwhile, Dan sees a German man talking on the phone. He suspects this man might be working for McCaffrey. Dan starts a conversation and asks about his job. Jessica doesn't understand their talk, so Dan switches to speaking in German. He then asks the man to open his case. The man does, and inside are just glass jars. Suddenly, another man attacks Dan from behind. They start fighting inside a lab. Dan defeats him and returns to his family shortly after. He tells them they should leave, but Nina decides to meet Trevor. There, she finds out Trevor is cheating on her. Heartbroken, she leaves and rejoins her family. Dan sees her upset and teaches her a martial arts move that causes serious pain. Nina uses that move on Trevor and snaps a photo of him crumpled on the ground, which lifts her mood. As the trip continues, their family bond grows stronger. Nina tells Dan that she's thinking of taking back her editor's job. She appreciates Dan and thanks him for always being there for her. The next day, Augie calls Dan and tells him he's on the way to deliver the passports. But Dan still hasn't told his family the truth about his past. Dan practices how to confess. Then Kyle joins him and trying to explain, gaming is the one thing I'm really good at. Like pro-level good. I'll prove it to you. Then he invites Dan for a laser tag match. Kyle tags the first 2 targets. Then Dan uses his old skills and gets the last 3. Dan wins the game. Kyle feels a little bad, but their bond grows stronger. By the time they reach Vegas, the family is closer than ever. Dan books a top suite in a luxury hotel. He goes downstairs where Augie gives him a new identity card and takes a lot of money in exchange. Dan prepares to tell Jessica the truth over a candlelight dinner. Kyle and Nina offer to babysit. Dan warns them not to leave the hotel no matter what, but they ignore him and go out to explore the streets. They reach a gaming arena where Kyle meets a famous streamer named Ren. Ren introduces him to Valkyrie, who invites Kyle to join his final game. But McCaffrey's men are watching them. As Kyle's teammates eliminates one by one, Kyle stays calm and takes out the entire opposing team, winning the match in style. Meanwhile, McCaffrey's men already know Dan's location. Dan is trying to tell Jessica the truth, but the waiter keeps interrupting them. So Dan switches to French and starts explaining to Jessica. Jessica is impressed by his speech. She didn't know Dan spoke 2 foreign languages. Dan calls the kids, but no one answers. They rush upstairs to check on them. Jessica thinks the kids are asleep, but they're just dummies. Jessica plays Love Mist, and Dan sees a red laser through it. He quickly dodges bullets. He throws an alcohol bottle and shoots it. The explosion catches the attackers on fire, but one man grabs Jessica and holds her hostage. Dan puts down his gun and pleads let her go. She knows nothing. The attacker calls Dan by his real name, Sean. Jessica is shocked when the man starts talking about Sean's past and his secret plans. Dan quickly knocks him out, but the shock makes Jessica vomit. She checks on the kids in the room, but realizes they are just dummies. Jessica and Dan rush to the HyperX arena. Jessica looks very upset with Dan. Kyle is celebrating his big win. Dan and Jessica arrive, pick up the kids, and leave immediately. On the way, Dan finally opens up. He says, "Before I met your mom, I worked as an assassin. My old boss wants me dead." The kids don't believe him until someone starts shooting at them. Dan takes Carr as cover and eliminates the attacker. When they reach a safe place, Dan explains that he worked for a man named McCaffrey and he's responsible for killing 43 people. Kyle gets angry and calls Dan a hypocrite. He says, "You told me to stay away from fake violence, but you're a real killer." Now they understand why Dan didn't want to leave the city or go on social media. Dan gives them new identities. Nina becomes Molly Anderson. Kyle is now Van, but the kids refuse to accept it and walk away. Jessica also decides to leave Dan and take full responsibility of the kids. Jessica calls Gwen for help when Dan sits outside the house, silently guarding them. By morning, Jessica and the kids leave. Dan quietly watches them leave, heartbroken. At the airport, they are surprised to see Gwen waiting with a private jet. On jet, Gwen tells Jessica about her ex. She says he left her for another woman. Slowly, Jessica realizes Gwen is talking about her. Suddenly, McCaffrey arrives. He makes a video call to Dan, inviting him to meet at an abandoned hotel. When Dan arrives, McCaffrey's men take him to the top floor. McCaffrey greets him with a hug. That's when the truth comes out. McCaffrey is Dan's father. He's proud that Dan defeated all his men. Now, he wants Dan to return to his side. In exchange, he promises to spare Dan's family, but Dan never contacts them again. Dan has no choice. He agrees. McCaffrey's men take the family to the elevator to send them away, but Kyle presses buttons to slow down lift. He and Nina tries to convince Jessica to fight back, as Jessica rips off Max's diaper and throws it at the guard's face. And he falls down. Just as McCaffrey prepares to leave, Gwen tries to seduce Dan, but he knocks her out cold. At that moment, Jessica and the kids rushes in. Dan promises his family no more secrets. "I'll tell you everything from now on." McCaffrey grows suspicious when Kyle launches his drone from the balcony. Its camera feeds live video to his phone. Dan takes over drone and spots men are coming there. Dan tells his family to wait on the roof until he deals with the attackers. Kyle uses a drone to track McCaffrey's men, and he feeds Dan their locations, so he takes them down one by one. Dan tells McCaffrey to end it, but McCaffrey refuses. His men open fire at him, but Dan dodges them all. Meanwhile, Gwen wakes up and goes to the rooftop, looking for the family. Jessica sees the elevator coming and hides the kids. When it opens, she starts firing. Gwen challenges Jessica to a one-on-one fight. Gwen wins at first and buries Jessica under rubber padding. At the same time, Dan defeats the last of McCaffrey's men, but McCaffrey knocks Dan down, aims a gun at him, and says, "Your family made you weak." Jessica, badly hurt, sees Gwen approaching the kids. She finds her strength and gets up, but Gwen pushes her downside. But this time, Jessica uses a stick like a spear and takes Gwen down for good. Dan removes a bullet from McCaffrey's gun. He challenges him to a hand-to-hand fight. McCaffrey wins again and points the gun. But just then, the family shows up. Nina steps forward and says, "I'm happy to meet my grandfather. Maybe we can live like a normal family." McCaffrey scoffs. Words won't change anything. But as he gets distracted, Dan seizes the moment. He knocks McCaffrey out cold. The family reunites as the police arrive. 6 months later, Nina becomes a famous editor, writing exposés about McCaffrey's crime network. Kyle builds a huge following with his gaming videos. Dan starts a self-defense academy to teach others. And Jessica becomes a personal coach. For the first time, they live a peaceful, honest life together.